There's a quiet moment that happens when you look at your phone and realize there's no one you feel like calling. Not because no one exists, because no one feels right. That realization doesn't arrive with sadness at first. It arrives with a strange neutrality. You scroll, you pause, you put the phone down. And instead of loneliness, there's something else. A sense that connection takes more energy than you're willing to spend. That's uncomfortable to admit, because the story you've heard your whole life says that people without many friends must be lacking something: social skills, warmth, effort. But that story doesn't quite fit. You don't struggle to understand people. If anything, you notice too much. You catch shifts in tone others miss. You feel tension before words change. You sense when someone is present in body but not in mind. And that awareness doesn't make you crave more interaction. It makes you selective. Still, that selectiveness comes with questions. Why do conversations feel draining so quickly? Why does small talk feel heavier than silence? Why does being around people sometimes feel lonelier than being alone? You notice how easily you could reach out and how deliberately you don't. Not because you dislike people, because being around them asks something of you that you no longer give automatically. You've tried forcing it before. You showed up, you listened, you laughed in the right places, and afterward you felt strangely empty, not hurt, not rejected, just depleted. So you learned to sit with yourself instead. And that choice came with relief and judgment from others, from yourself. You hear the questions in your head. Am I isolating? Am I avoiding something? Is this healthy? The strange thing is you don't feel disconnected from humanity. You feel disconnected from noise. You notice how friendships often come with unspoken expectations, immediate replies, emotional availability, consistent presence. Those expectations aren't written down, but they're felt. And you feel them strongly, so strongly that you sometimes pull away before anyone asks for more. That withdrawal doesn't come from fear. It comes from foresight. You've learned what happens when you ignore your internal limits. You've learned how quickly closeness can turn into obligation. And obligation for you doesn't feel like love. It feels like weight. People often assume those with few friends are closed off, but that's not how it feels inside you. You feel open, exposed even. That openness just isn't distributed evenly. You don't want 10 shallow connections. You want one that doesn't require performance. And those are rare. So instead of filling the space with people, you fill it with quiet. That quiet isn't empty, it's observant. You notice how most social interaction revolves around managing impressions, how often people speak without listening, how rarely silence is allowed to exist without being fixed. You don't rush to fill it, and that makes others uneasy. They ask why you're so quiet, why you don't come out more, why you don't put yourself out there. You usually don't have an answer that satisfies them, because the real answer sounds wrong. The real answer is that being alone feels cleaner than being misunderstood, but saying that out loud sounds arrogant or defensive or sad, so you keep it to yourself. And over time, the circle grows smaller, not abruptly, gradually. You stop investing in connections that require constant explanation. You stop chasing people who only notice you when you're useful. You stop maintaining friendships out of habit. What remains is space, and space is confronting. In that space, you start noticing things about yourself. How quickly you pick up on emotional shifts. How deeply you process conversations long after they end. How strongly you react internally even when you appear calm. You realize that every interaction costs you something. Not because people are bad, because you absorb more than most. And when you don't have many friends, people assume you must feel rejected. But rejection isn't what you feel. You feel protected. Protected from having to dull yourself to stay connected. Protected from explaining why you need time alone. Protected from relationships that ask more than they give. Still, There's an unease that lingers, a sense that maybe you're missing something essential, that maybe having fewer people around means something is wrong. That doubt doesn't come from inside. It comes from comparison. You see others surrounded by friends, laughing, sharing moments, and for a second you wonder if you're broken, but then you imagine yourself in those moments, the noise, the constant engagement, the surface level exchanges, and your body tightens, not with longing, with resistance. You don't envy their quantity, you envy their ease. And you wonder why ease has always felt so far away. You begin to notice a pattern. People often open up to you quickly. They tell you things they don't tell others. They feel understood in your presence, but few stay. Not because you push them away, because staying requires meeting you at a depth most people don't live in. So the connections fade, and you're left with fewer names, but clearer internal space. That clarity doesn't feel like loneliness. It feels like standing in a quiet room after leaving a loud party. Your ears ring for a while, then they adjust. And in that adjustment, something becomes apparent. Having few friends didn't happen by accident. It wasn't bad luck. It wasn't social failure. It was shaped by something deeper. Something about how you perceive, process, and protect yourself. But that understanding hasn't fully surfaced yet. You only know that what looks like isolation from the outside doesn't feel like isolation on the inside. It feels like alignment. And that's where the discomfort begins. Because if this is true, then the assumption that more friends equals better life starts to crack. And if that assumption cracks, something else must take its place, something you haven't named yet. Not clearly, not honestly. And until you do, you're left sitting with the question, what is it exactly that sets empaths with few or no friends apart? And why does that difference feel both heavy and strangely right? At some point, the question stops being about other people. It turns inward. You start noticing how different your internal experience is compared to those around you. How conversations linger in your body long after they end. How casual interactions leave traces. How even pleasant company can feel like too much. And you realize something unsettling. Most people move through social spaces lightly. They brush against emotions and keep going. You don't brush, you absorb. That absorption isn't dramatic. It's subtle. You register inconsistencies, you feel unspoken tension. You sense when someone is performing rather than present. And all of that information has to go somewhere. So when you have fewer friends, it isn't because you failed socially. It's because your system doesn't filter interaction the same way. Here is where the midpoint tilts. What looks like distance from the outside isn't distance at all. It's compression. You're condensing your world to a size you can actually inhabit without losing yourself. This is the moment where the misunderstanding begins. People assume your solitude means you're disconnected, that you're lonely, that you must crave more social input. But what they don't see is how full your internal landscape already is. You don't lack stimulation. You have too much of it. Every friendship, every interaction, every emotional exchange adds another layer to an already dense inner world. So without realizing it, you start choosing quality over quantity, not as a philosophy, as a survival adjustment. This is where the truth sharpens. Empaths with few or no friends usually share a rare internal configuration. They don't experience social connection as neutral. They experience it as immersive, which means every relationship demands a level of presence that most people never notice they're giving. You don't casually hang out. You tune in. You don't just listen. You track shifts. You don't simply respond. You regulate emotional space. And doing that repeatedly without recovery becomes unsustainable, so the circle shrinks. Not because you're antisocial, because you're precise. Precision is often mistaken for avoidance, But avoidance is driven by fear. Precision is driven by awareness. You become selective because you know the cost. You've learned that not every connection deserves full access to your inner world. You've learned that being liked by many often requires being diluted. And dilution feels worse than solitude. That's one of the rare traits. Another is that you don't bond through activity, you bond through resonance.